Thank you and good morning, everyone. What a joy and privilege it is to be in worship with all of God's people today. I'm a biblical geographer, and this is not how I usually dress for work, right? If you've wandered around Israel with me or seen me in video production, you know that I dress in a way that a Bible geographer should dress. So I feel a little out of uniform now, but nonetheless, the theme remains the same. My goal as a scholar is to make the Bible's geography meaningful. Now, sometimes that's easier to do because the biblical authors are pretty upfront about how and where an event is occurring. Sometimes we need to do a little bit more work, and that's the case with the text we're going to study this morning, Psalm 23. It is a psalm that is bred, born, and best read in the wilderness, and that's what I intend to do this morning. Have a look at that. Well, at least I intended to have a look at that, right? Okay. He can't speak without slides. There, I'm so used to speaking with imagery in front of me and a backdrop that I'm not sure I can do it without. Uncertainty is the great enemy of our personal well-being. And I'm going to add this morning, it is a great enemy of our worship. We come to church and the intention is to join in singing praises and waving palm branches on this Palm Sunday. But I've been in that place that maybe you are this morning where I just didn't feel like it, because there was so much uncertainty intruding in my life that I just didn't feel like praising God. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that uncertainty. And the Bible actually takes this topic up rather frequently. God does not want us to live in uncertainty. And so he, with some frequency, speaks of a certainty that exceeds our circumstances. Now, for example, take a look at these words from Paul in Philippians. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or want. I can do all things through him who gives me the strength. There is certainty in the midst of uncertain circumstances there. Psalm 23 addresses the same theme with a picture. It is a picture of the shepherd with his or her livestock in the wilderness. The Lord is my shepherd, and as a consequence, I lack nothing. So about the last thing I would expect is to come into the building today and read this text for you and have you say, I never heard of that text before, right? Psalm 23 is so frequently pictured in our homes, in plaques. It appears in pendants. I think it might be one of the most familiar portions of Scripture there is. But folks, for all of it's done, I think it could do more if we could just get the geography right. And the geography of Psalm 23 is the Judean wilderness. Think about that for a moment. What we say changes depending on how we say it and where we hear it. And I'm going to suggest to you this morning that this psalm will have new power, that you will hear it again for the first time if you can simply put the psalm where it belongs, in the wilderness, where it speaks about having wilderness without wanting. There are three moves that I'd like to make in our message today. First of all, I need to help you put Psalm 23 in the wilderness. It isn't obvious that it belongs there, so I want to spend a minute helping you do that. Secondly, once we've done that, I want to help you hear Psalm 23 as it sounds against a wilderness backdrop. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, talk about living Psalm 23 during our seasons of wilderness. Start off here, Psalm 23, wilderness pastures. Now, I know that if you would enter Psalm 23 into your internet browser, this is the sort of picture that you would get connected to Psalm 23. And you may even have a picture like this in your home with Psalm 23 written in it. And I'm sorry, but it just doesn't belong in that sort of setting. It belongs in a setting that looks more like this, even though Psalm 23 doesn't have any of the typical wilderness terms we expect of a piece of wilderness literature in the Bible. We know when the biblical authors or poets are bringing us to this ecosystem, sometimes they use language like this, and then we know we're there. This one's not quite so obvious, so it deserves a minute of our time. In order to see why I put Psalm 23 in the wilderness, we have to first of all realize that this is a psalm of David, who was a shepherd who lived in Bethlehem. And that means that I have to understand the language of this poetry through the lens of his eyes. What we know is that there are two places the shepherds of Bethlehem pastured their livestock. One is a summer pasture ground, one is a winter pasture ground. So let's take a look at both. In late spring and summer, when the crops have been removed from the agricultural fields, then the livestock are brought into the land that's near the village. It's safe there. There's good water available there, and there's plenty of food there available for the livestock. And of course, they leave behind one of the wonderful things that helps mature the well-being of the soil for the next planting season. But while the grain fields are growing near the village in those agricultural fields, then the livestock are not welcome. And it's at that season of the year, in the winter season, when the shepherds take their livestock out onto the fringes of the Judean wilderness, where the early rains of Israel have produced just a little bit of a flourish of green. Those are our two options for this psalm. Either we put it where everything already exists near the village in the agricultural fields, or we move it to the second pasture land, the wilderness pasture. And I would suggest to you that the psalm makes little sense in a setting where you have everything you need. But it takes on new power when we realize what David is saying. I lack nothing. I lack nothing in the place that apparently lacks everything. That's why I put Psalm 23 in the wilderness. It's where David would have pastured his livestock during the winter months of the year. So let's talk about reading this Psalm 23 against that wilderness context. And I love the power of the first sentence, because what it does is it grabs my attention so that I must read on. That's what authors and poets do. They want to make sure that they lock us down so that we don't wander, our attention doesn't wander off to anything. So imagine David bringing you to the edge of the Judean wilderness, to that view, and throwing this sentence down: I lack nothing. Wow, you got to explain more. And I'm with you now because I want to see where you're going with this. And that's what he does in the rest of the psalm. He talks about the life of the livestock in the wilderness pasture as a life that does not lack for provision, protection, joy, or a homecoming. So let's move through the psalm and see how each of these look. First of all, the livestock do not lack for provision. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. It's one thing to say that in a fresh green pasture in the Midwest. It's a whole nother thing to say it out in the wilderness. Now, what we know is that sheep and goats needed to eat vegetation about 7 hours a day. And that's a whole day in the wilderness of eating in a place where there is very little vegetation to eat, unless it is that the shepherd knows exactly where to find that flourish of green pasture. You can see from this picture, can't you, that those green pastures aren't everywhere? They're sort of tucked in on the north and the west side of rising terrain, often out of sight from the livestock, unless the shepherd walks over that ridge and brings them there, and then makes them lie down in that green pasture in the wilderness. Well, sheep need to be watered twice a day. And again, you strain your eyes to look into that view and see, where in the world am I going to find water for the livestock? Again, he leads me beside the quiet waters and refreshes my soul. The shepherd knows exactly where the spring has broken out in the wilderness. Tucked into some little fold of the valley floor, he takes the livestock there twice a day to make sure that they're watered. And as a result, they do not lack for provision in a place that appears to have nothing. Secondly, they do not lack for protection. And they need it because there's lots of large predators in the ecosystem of the biblical wilderness. The Asian lion, the Iranian wolf, the white-striped hyena, the Persian leopard are all ready to make lunch out of a sheep or a goat from your flock. Remember what David said for Samuel 17? I have battled the lion and the bear. He was not kidding. He had as a shepherd in the wilderness. And what's more, not only are the predators a risk, the terrain itself provides all sorts of hazards. And so, the reputation of the shepherd is based on the fact that the shepherd knows how to move the livestock through the terrain, away from the predators. He guides me along right paths for his name's sake. It's a matter of reputation that the shepherd knows how to do this and provide protection for the livestock. And then notice the subtle but so important change in the personal pronoun. Even though I walk away. What happens when a member of the flock says, well, you're leading me that way, but I have a whole different idea. And I go off this direction, and I put myself in harm's way. What's the best thing for the shepherd to do at that point? Stay with the 99, right? There's your big economic investment. You aren't going to walk away from 99 to take a chance at finding the one who's been lost somewhere in the folds of the wilderness. And yet that's exactly what we read about. You don't lack protection here, because even if I walk away through the darkest valley, the valley of the shadow of death, I just don't have to fear harm, evil. You're with me. You have left the safety, you have left the flock, and you've come looking for me in the folds of the wilderness, your rod and your staff, the club that Pastor Chappell had in his hand before, and the staff for guiding, they're my reminder that you're there to protect and care for me. Has a powerful picture of protection. The wilderness also doesn't lack for joy, which is a little surprising to the livestock. Because the livestock don't think about enjoyment out in the wilderness area. They do look puzzled, don't they? There's no joy out here. There is flat out just survival. All I need to do is get through the day. And for that reason, the psalm itself changes the picture from the wilderness setting to a banquet hall setting. It's like we've suddenly been transported out of the wilderness to this banquet hall, and in that banquet hall, the shepherd becomes the host. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. There's no wilderness left here except maybe that little hint in the word enemies. My enemies are all around me, but I'm not focusing on them or thinking about them. I'm just enjoying myself because you've invited me to a wilderness party. The wilderness does not lack joy. And the wilderness does not lack a homecoming. When the sun begins to set, and as those shadows lengthen, the wilderness becomes a very dangerous place, even when the shepherd is around. It's harder to pick the right path. The large predators have an easier time sneaking up on the flock. And so at the end of the day, you go home. You move to a cave that the shepherd has built near a cave that the shepherd has enhanced near the village with a fieldstone blocking wall to put solid barriers between you and the predators. It's been a good day. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. It's been such a good day that I'm anticipating the next one will be like it. But in the meantime, I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This psalm that starts in the wilderness doesn't end there. It goes home. And for the livestock, that's an incredibly powerful moment, that homegoing, because I will dwell there in safety in the house of the Lord forever. It sounds different, doesn't it? When you take this language of Psalm 23 and you put it out in a wilderness context, you see that David sees himself through the eyes of his flock. When the Lord is his shepherd, he doesn't lack provision, protection, joy, or a homecoming. But how does this place that lacks everything become a place that lacks nothing? The psalm makes sure we get it right. 13 times, the psalmist makes sure that our attention is drawn to the Lord. Throughout, beginning, end, our focus is on the Lord. If our focus is on wilderness, then we feel the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty. But when our focus is on the shepherd, then I find certainty in my uncertain circumstances. How do I live it? Right? It's one thing to see it, and it's a whole other thing to live it. Because for me, wilderness is not just an ecosystem, but it is a season of life. And if you're right there now, you know what I mean. I've been there, and I know the powerlessness that I feel in those circumstances. I know the emptiness that I feel. It comes with a message from the physician's office. It can come as I see a relationship breaking down. It can come with financial distress. That's a wilderness season. And the psalm speaks to it. It talks about provision. If today you're feeling uncertain about having all that you need, the psalm says you can have certainty in the midst of your uncertain circumstances, because he is the one who leads you and helps you lie down in the green pasture. He is the one who brings you to the quiet water. If your uncertainty today has to do with personal safety, then know that there can be certainty in the midst of your uncertain circumstances, because he's ready to guide you. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Remember, the shepherd's reputation is based on the fact that he chooses right routes. He simply invites us to follow. Well, wait a minute. What if I've chosen to wander off course? What if I've chosen to go a different direction? He's still there. He follows me into those dark places that I've chosen to go, those sinful places in my life, and said, you're at risk, and I'm here. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. If today you just don't see joy anywhere near or on the horizon, then you can be certain in the midst of those uncertain circumstances, because the Lord is preparing a table before you in the presence of your enemies. He's ready to anoint your head and fill that cup until it overflows the lip. And if I'm meeting you today at a time when the Lord is about ready to end your life here on earth, and you're feeling the uncertainty of those circumstances, again, the Lord has a message for us. I've laid down my life for you. You are going home, not because of who you are or whom you could become. You're going home because I've laid down my life for you. And how far am I ready to stretch out my arms to make sure that you go to that home? How about that far? I'm going to absorb all of the anger of the Heavenly Father at your sin to make sure that your eternity is absolutely secure. There is no doubt about where your life ends. It ends in the home of the Father, where we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. How does that season of life, where everything seems uncertain, where everything seems so void and barren, how does it become a place that I can not just survive but thrive? When my focus isn't on the stuff that has nothing, but on the one who has everything. The Lord is my shepherd. That's why I lack nothing. That's why I can know certainty in the midst of all uncertain circumstances. That's Psalm 23 in the wilderness. A psalm about wilderness without wanting. Amen.